He is already a friend of us, and he has held different positions for the Allan Kardec Spiritist Society of Massachusetts and acted as the programs director for the United States Spiritist Council. He has also a Bachelor of Science in Engineering, a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology, and a Master's in Business Administration, focused on strategy and leadership development. Thank you, Flavio, for being here with us. Now it's all yours.
Thank you, Viviane, and thank you, folks, for the invitation. It's a great joy that I accepted the invitation once again. It's always a pleasure to spend some minutes with this esteemed group of people that are dedicated, committed, and really driven to study Spiritism. The topic that we've been asked to cover is to really go over Léon Denis' life, as we like to call him, the Spiritist Apostle. And there's a couple of reasons for that. A lot of folks think, that Léon Denis was, continuing the works of Allan Kardec. Some folks think that Léon Denis was the potential replacement for Allan Kardec. Some folks think of Léon Denis as, someone that's, again, who was Léon Denis, right? And the definition that we have for this great individual, he was, or he is, right, the Spiritist Apostle. But before we get into the content here, I'd like to invite us all to continue with our raised thoughts after this beautiful prayer and thank all of our benefactor spirits, all of our guardian angels that are here with us, wherever we may be, that are side by side to all of us. May they bring peace to our hearts. May they really, enlighten our minds so we can really understand the content and the topics that we'll cover with all the love, with all the dedication from which we put into putting this together. So let me say a few things first, right? Léon Denis, we've all heard about him. He wrote a couple of books, or maybe a handful of books. He was a follower of Kardec. He wrote some interesting things, but without us going to his biography overall, I'd like to maybe share one sentence that I think it's one of the most beautiful ones that he wrote. He says, and I quote, "Love is the heavenly attraction of souls and worlds, the divine power that connects the universes as it governs them and makes them fruitful. Love is the look of God." And I remember when the first time I read this phrase, I was so touched by it that it may have taken me, a good 30 minutes to come to grips to what is he trying to say with this phrase? What is the hidden message? What is the overall idea that he was trying to put together, right? So let's break it down in a few, parts. Love is the heavenly attraction of souls and worlds. Meaning, what attracts us, but not attraction that is just a simple attraction. It's an attraction on steroids. It's an attraction that's turbocharged, right? It's a heavenly attraction of souls, right? Of ourselves, of worlds, meaning human beings are attracted by love. And I'm not just necessarily talking about love, meaning a sexual pleasure love, kind of love. I'm not talking about just the love of someone that you love, the companionship. Love of, for example, what attracts you? What brings you together to your work, your activities, things that you like to do, people that you like to hang out with? That's the love I'm talking about. That's much bigger than the love that's filled, right, with material interests, as we know that. So that's the love that brings us all together. That's the love that brings worlds together. How big this is, folks. Love is this heavenly attraction of worlds, of environments. It's the divine power. It's through how God really connects both all the universes, meaning all the Milky Ways of the world, all the different universes, and it also uses love to govern them. How does God use love to govern our universe? That's a great question, right? So do you see how I'm going deeper on this phrase? So if God uses love to govern, to control, to direct the universe, how does he do that? So allow me to share a few things. So have you guys heard about the phrase, oh, he or she, came to an understanding that was either through love or pain, either through love or tears. Have you heard that expression before? Have you heard that? Oh, he's come to the realization of this thanks to love, or thanks to tears, thanks to suffering. So God controls or governs the universes through its moral laws. The divine laws, depending on how we call them. And the divine laws are really a beautiful expression of how much God loves us. Because for starters, the divine laws, they never change, and they're there to teach us how to do better, how to be better, human beings, how to be better spirits. So it's thanks to God's love, and it's also how God utilizes love that these divine laws govern the universes, or the moral laws govern our own actions and reactions, at least should govern our actions and our thoughts and so forth. And as we learn through Spiritism, the more we come close to those moral laws, right, to these divine laws, the happier we live. The closer we get to the divine laws, the happier lives we live. More fruitful lives, as the phrase talks about. So God uses love to give us more beautiful environments, to give us opportunities to produce, to give, to be charitable, to love one another. It's through God's love that all of these can happen. And then he concludes, or he wraps up by saying that love is the look of God. As we know from John chapter 1, verse 1, God is love. Léon Denis goes a little further, saying that love is the look, or how God manifests itself. It's through love. If we really want to understand God, if we look at love, we'll see the face of God. Do you guys get how complex this sentence is? How much meaning there's behind one single sentence that Léon Denis wrote? When I first, when I first got to know this, when I first read this many, many years ago, I was appalled by how deep this phrase is, how much content it brings that can really explain a lot of what happens with God's love, with the universes, how things are connected, how we connect with one another, and so forth. So anyways, I want to share that so we can all get our engines running, because there's a lot of content that I will share throughout the next few minutes. And the first one that I will share here is that the idea that there's some authors or some folks argue that, if Kardec, was no longer able to do his work, if he, for some reason, was not capable of continuing his activities, right? Would there be any successor? Would there be any replacement for Allan Kardec? And too much so that in the Spiritist magazine of 1861, right, the topic came up. Kardec, through the conversation with mediums and all the turning tables messages that he got, right, he asked that question: who will succeed me when I leave? He was concerned about the future of Spiritism. What will become of Spiritism once no one is seen to appear in a noticeable way to take its reins? Can you tell me if my successor is already chosen? So when Allan Kardec starts to question the immortal spirits, I mean, guys, come on, right? I'm doing this, but I see around me, nobody's, had the motivation, the interest, the commitment, the time, the availability to continue my job or this job. What's going to happen the moment I just go back, depart? What's going to happen? And then the spirits answered the question in a very enlightened way, because they don't touch Allan Kardec's free will. They say, look how interesting the answer is. Yes and no, because it's given to humans free will. We cannot interfere there. And the person could, up to the last moment, say, you know what? I can't do this. It's too big for me. I'm not going to do it. So yes, there is somebody identified to do the work, but we cannot say yes, because if that person decides to do something else, I mean, we all have free will. We all have our ability to decide, to choose for ourselves. So we can't say yes for sure. That's the answer. And to me, that's a beautiful answer, because once again, the spirits are talking to Allan Kardec then. Again, 1861, Spiritism is only 4 years old, right? If you think about it, it's in infancy state, right? It's crawling before even walking. I would say now we're starting to run, but this is back when the baby was still crawling. And Allan Kardec was already concerned about the long-term future of Spiritism. And the spirit guide, or his mentor, whoever answered him in the Spiritist review or through those communications, mentioned yes and no, because if that person decides to give up or to change course, we can't say, you know what, you're going to go there. Yeah, you must go there. We can't interfere with anybody's free will. So that's one of the most important dialogues that Allan Kardec had during that time. And one that I'd say it's very impactful, because he gave him the more motivation to keep going. Because if for some reason he was not able to finish, which by the way he didn't, he mentioned that several times in the Spirit's book, as well as in the Spiritist magazine, that the work will be continued. Others will come and will complement the works, right? He said that it has often been said that many spirits would incarnate to aid the Spiritist movement. Folks, that's in the Spiritist magazine of 1861. Kardec was already, sensing that other folks will come in, other spirits will come in, and they will contribute. They will provide more additional guidance, additional knowledge, additional content that wouldn't contradict what he wrote in the codification itself, but will complement instead. And then, of course, the answer, as you can imagine, the spirit guide says, without a doubt, many spirits will have this mission, but each to their specialty to act. Everyone will be revealed by their works, and none by any pretension of supremacy. And to me, that's a beautiful sentence as well, because everyone contributing in their own, location, their own situation, with their own talents, with their own capabilities, with their own expertise, everyone contributing to make the pie bigger. So they are adding to the pie becomes bigger, and everybody has access to the pie down the road. That's one of in my opinion, one of the most important dialogues that Allan Kardec had with the spirit guide during those conversations, that will lead him to believe, and we know again now, that other spirits were being prepared to not only continue his works, but also in the event that something were to happen, right? Those spirits will pick up the tab and continue the activities. Folks, I'll take a pause here. Any questions, any comments? I know there's a lot to dissect, but I wanted to take a pause if there's any comments, any questions. How are we doing? Everything okay? Everybody okay? All right, so let me just bring some food for thought. Of course, I'm sure you know that Allan Kardec was his pseudonym, right? Meaning that was not his name. His name was Hippolyte Léon Denis Rival. That was his birth name. But have you guys stopped to think that within Allan Kardec's name, we have Léon Denis' name already embedded in it? Isn't that a coincidence or a mysterious connection? I'll leave that up to you, but at least it makes us think, right? So if Léon Denis' name was included in Kardec's name, that's something to think about, right? All right, let's switch gears here real quick. Let's talk about, one of the one of the most prolific theologians of the 14th century, Jerome of Prague. He was a revolutionary theologian. He was a reformist and really a follower of Jan Hus. The interesting thing about Jerome of Prague is that when you look at his biography, he did a lot of work. Meaning, he graduated from the University of Prague in 1398, if I'm not mistaken. He went on to study at Oxford University. This is 1300. So this is 1300, almost 1400, right after Christ. He went on to study at Oxford University. He became very familiar with the reformist teachings of John Wycliffe at Oxford. John Wycliffe was one of the forerunners of the reformist, or the Reformation, or the Protestant, ideas, as we know. He was a philosopher, as I mentioned. He was a theologian. He was a university professor, and he was one of the church reformers that he dedicated his entire life to really move or remove all of those doctrines within the church and the dogmas that he found to be corrupt. For example, there was one dogma that you had to purchase your place in heaven. So by your contributions to the church, you purchased your house. And of course, the more money you had, the bigger house you build after you passed away. Meaning, the folks that had more money would have better lives in the in heaven, so to speak. He found that to be very corrupt. He found that to be not correct. He found that to be an offense to Christ's teachings. And that's why he was constantly in and out of jail, because he was, a lot of times thrown in jail because of some of his ideas that were very revolutionary by the time. Some of his ideas were so revolutionary that he thought that everybody should be treated equal. Very revolutionary for 1398 or 1400s. He thought he found and he pictured the idea that men and women were supposed to be treated the same. What a crazy idea in 1400s, right? 2021, that's still not the case. So Jerome of Prague already had those ideas in 1400s. So I want to call him a radical. He was a progressive radical that he brought to himself his death by execution because he was considered an heretic to the church. But he was an heretic to the Catholic Church, but on the flip side of that, he was a martyr for the overall Protestant movement. And followers of, for example, Jan Hus, who we know was one of the Allan Kardec's incarnations, right? All loved him because he talked the same language. Hang on, Flavio. I thought this was a talk about Léon Denis. Yes, it is. Why are you bringing Jerome of Prague? Because as we learn, he was Léon Denis' spirit guide. A lot of what Léon Denis wrote was through the intuition or through the guidance of Jerome of Prague. His other spiritual protector, spiritual benefactor, spirit guide was later identified as sorella or sister in Italian. And later on, almost close to Léon Denis' passing, she revealed herself as Joan of Arc. So when we look at that, we see the connection of all these spirits working together to really produce that body of work that would later on be published and written by Léon Denis and so forth. So the idea that Jerome of Prague really came to become, or really was, right, Léon Denis' mentor, it's really interesting because Jerome of Prague was someone that was really at the forefront of the Protestant movement, along with Jan Hus, right? Jan Hus, who was Allan Kardec's incarnation, right, as we know. And all these spirits were working together to really make Christianity a different thing. and really remove all the obstacles, all the corruption, all those things that people detoured Christianity to other ideals. These spirits were working together to ensure that we're bringing that back to Jesus' time. We're bringing that back to the concepts that Jesus left us, and not the concepts that folks, right, were putting together based on their own selfish movements and hidden agendas and so forth. So to continue, right, the whole history here, as I mentioned, Jerome of Prague was a close friend of Jan Hus. They talked a lot about the idea of reforming the church, right? Johannes Hus, or Jan Hus, was a Czech theologian as well. He was a philosopher. He was a church reformer. He was the inspiration behind Hussitism, right? There's a philosophy within the Protestant ideal or Protestant movement called Hussitism that really understands he was one of the predecessors of Protestantism back in the Bohemian Reformation. So the very first ideas of Reformation back in the 1400s. So when you look at after John Wycliffe, right, the one that really built the ecclesiastical reform, Hus was considered the second church reformer, and Jerome of Prague was the third church reformer, even before Calvin, Luther, Zwingli, and some other ones. So his teachings, folks, are so strong and are so influential, right, that we would not be able to have Protestant church today or the Protestant movement today without his contributions, so to speak. That's why it's really important to bring this, because a lot of his ideas, right, were the same ideas as Allan Kardec, meaning they preached, right, the universal priesthood of believers. They didn't believe in any specific denomination for a particular church. They, excuse me, they were communicating, with God or with the creation or with the Creator in ways that, as we learned today, it was mediumship. But back in the days, they had those, rituals of really calling spirits and talking to them and so forth, right? So before being burned, Hus said the following words to the executioner. This is stuck with me, that it's so beautiful to remember these words. You are today burning a goose, because his last name, Hus, means goose in the Bohemian language. Today you are burning a goose, but within a century, you'll meet a swan. They cannot burn. So Martin Luther is usually identified, right, within the prophecy 100 plus years after that. And he's also usually identified as the swan. So what am I bringing this up? Because everything that has happened, right, there was a planning for it, right? There were a lot of planning behind all these movements, all these steps into Christianity to become what it is, and for Spiritism to have, or to be able to really be, developed, or to be able to be brought over so that we can learn from it. Because had we stayed within the church teachings of the 11th century or 12th century, right, Spiritism wouldn't have a way to find followers, because we would have missed the whole Protestant Reformation, the whole idea of not having differences between this and that. So when we look at that, well, guess what I'm trying to suggest here is that there has been a lot of planning behind these activities. And obviously, right, we have the corroboration or the confirmation of that through many, many different messages. So for example, this one that I'm sharing here is a message that was channeled during the 4th World Congress of Spiritism in Paris in 2004, where Divaldo Franco wrote this message in reverse. As you can see, it's written in reverse. No, I did not copy and paste in reverse. It was written this way. And it's in French, a language that Divaldo does not know, right? And this message was signed by the spirit of Léon Denis, declaring that Allan Kardec was in fact Jan Hus' reincarnation. This information was, given in different places before, but not in a message that was such character as this one shows. So we can really trace a lot of similarities between Jerome of Prague, Jan Hus, or Allan Kardec's previous incarnation, Léon Denis, and Allan Kardec's, last incarnation. So these spirits have been working with themselves or working together for many, incarnations, so that they can really build what we all, taking, or really, the word, escaped me here. Really taking, really useful, making it useful to ourselves now, right? We're really seeing the byproduct of all these activities that have been planned many centuries ago. So if we flip over to Léon Denis' biography, so he was born in a village called Fug, located in the surroundings of Tours in France, on January 1st, 1846. He comes from a very modest family, so he was a very, humble, upbringing. He read several, books throughout, his upbringing. He was an avid reader. He loved to read. He was really trying to get more knowledge about, through the books, through a lot of but basically, read everything he could get his hands on. And that's how he developed his own intelligence. And he became a very serious and competent self-didactic, meaning he learned a lot by himself, not going through formal school. And it was thanks to his habit to review books with interest that once he just, by chance, quotes, right, he glanced over a bookshelf and the Spirit's book was there. And then he picked it up, and everything, as we know, started from that little moment of him picking that book up. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that his passion for reading, his passion for knowledge, his thirst for information is what drove him to those bookstores. Folks, keep in mind, today we open up our cell phones, Amazon is there, one click, we get a book delivered to our house. Léon Denis' time, he had to walk sometimes many kilometers to get to the closest, bookstore, spend hours and hours going or really, searching for books, and then more and more time going over those books. He used to wake up early in the morning, once the sun was, set, in order to really leverage the light in order to be able to read. Because with candles, it's not very easy to read, as I'm sure you can get that, right? So once he found that book, there's a story on his biography that once he laid his hand on that book, he skimmed through it and he rushed home. He could not stop anywhere else because he wanted so much to read that book. His goal was to just finish that and read that as quickly as he could. So his overall connection with Spiritism really happened or started, right, at that moment. But he was not alone, as we know. Yes, he was a philosopher. He wrote a lot of content. He was a medium. He channeled a lot of messages. He was one of the main followers of Spiritism after Allan Kardec's death. We know that, along with Gabriel Delanne and Camille Flammarion. Those were the two major names, as we call, that really continue Kardec's works after Kardec's passing. And I found this beautiful mug when I was visiting the Kardec Museum in Paris a few years ago. Kardec, Denis, Delanne, and Flammarion. I thought it was interesting. I took a picture and really showcases, right, that, of course, Allan Kardec was the codifier or the compiler of Spiritism, right? But Léon Denis was not only the replacement or the continuator or the one that was going to follow Kardec, but he was also, right, someone that corroborated a lot of the teachings through his books. A lot of what Kardec wrote, or pretty much everything that Kardec wrote, Léon Denis will go on to write, more, content, additional messages, and so forth. So it's really important to mention that his mission was, of course, not as great as Allan Kardec's mission, but was of a great value because a lot of what he wrote his works overall served to really catapult Spiritism to the more locations, to the more people. And because he spoke several languages, he traveled and he's really shared that message with the surrounding countries back then. Once again, today, I jump on a plane, 6 hours later, I'm in Vancouver, right? When Léon Denis traveled to really talk about Spiritism, he traveled on the back of a horse. So it took a lot longer for him to really convey these routes or these places in Belgium, Luxembourg, and other countries, surrounding countries, England, and so forth. So what we can say Paul of Tarsus did for Christianity, Léon Denis did for Spiritism, because he brought Spiritism to a lot more countries after Allan Kardec really compiled Spiritism. So that's why his mission is of great importance, that really continued the works of Allan Kardec. I think it's really, really important to mention that. And as I was mentioning before, when we look at the Spirit's book, look at this quote that Léon Denis wrote in a letter to Kardec himself. I found in this book the clear solution, complete and logical, to a universal problem. My conviction became strong and sound. The Spiritist theory dissipated my indifference and all of my doubts. So the Spiritist theory dissipated my indifference and all of my doubts. So after he read this book, a lot of his doubts were gone, were eliminated, were just taken away, because he was really able to grasp all the teachings. And then a question I have for you guys is, was this because maybe he was alongside those spirits, getting some of that intuition, some of that knowledge, some of the contents beforehand? Or was because he was a special spirit that, God put him? You get what I'm trying to say with this, right? So all these works did not start in that incarnation alone, right? So the planning, the collaboration that these spirits have had in the past are showcased by Jerome of Prague, Joan of Arc, Jan Hus, Kardec, all these spirits working together as a team to ensure that Spiritism one day will take off and will be, spread out to all over the world. So when we look at this, I think it's important to go back to the basics, or to the beginning, the very first meeting. And he had a chance to meet Allan Kardec several times. But can you guys imagine what happened in the very first meeting? So Kardec was on a tour to really promote the Spirit's book. And he went to Tours, where Léon Denis used to live. And when he came, he gave a conference. So Léon Denis was involved into the Spiritist movement by then. He rented a room to welcome Kardec. He was, the imperial police, suspicious. What's going on here? What's happening? And what is this meeting about? And right? So they blocked their room, so they couldn't meet in their room. They had to use a friend's garden under the stars so that the first meeting could take place. And what he thought was going to be maybe 50 people, over 300 people showed up, standing there on that garden to really listen to Kardec's words. So people were stepping on plants. This is a garden, folks, right? There's flowers everywhere. 300 people were there to listen, or to hear the professor, to hear Kardec, right? And they were there together. And when they spoke, right, a lot of things became very clear to Léon Denis' mind. A lot of things came clear of his works, of his overall needs, right, for the future. His commitment to Spiritism to really continue Allan Kardec's works. So the very first moment he had a chance to meet Allan Kardec in flash, they've been communicated before through letters, right? But the very first time they met, Allan Kardec in flash, he felt that this is what I got to do. This is my job. This is my activity here. This is my role within Spiritism. I think it's important really to mention. Then, of course, if you go back to his biography, he ate little meat, right? Drank mostly water, but he still enjoyed a cup of coffee like most intellectuals. I think it's funny to mention that, right? I do like coffee as well. I wish I was, no, I'm just kidding. So at 35, Léon Denis finds himself with very diminished physical skills. He's got some physical problems, some, issues going on with his, disabilities and whatnot. And with the prospect of, I didn't continue here. The prospect of, he continue his life alone, one of his close friends, right? And then, he said, you know what? I just can't get married to anybody, because if I get married and I'm going to have to do this work, that person's going to suffer. So he made a very selfish decision not to get married and really dedicate himself, right, to really continue the works of Spiritism. And of course, with his thoughts and works in favor of Spiritism, he deepened the ideas of Allan Kardec. He brought some additional content. As we know, for example, as the worker of the first hours, he really led, right, this lighthouse to really, illuminate, consciousness, right? This is what his biographer writes about him, meaning that once he realized about his job to do, once he realized what he was supposed to do, what he had to do, he said, you know what? It's not only me talking now. I have to really dedicate myself to these activities here that I have. And with that, I'm going to, commit myself to keep doing it, right? So, of course, his spirituality contribute, to the ideals. Yeah, he was a medium, as I mentioned before, right? And his works overall can show us that, excuse me. His works overall show us that everything is connected, right? So his works and the responsibilities that he talked about, the continuation of Allan Kardec starting the compilation of Spiritism, other, spirits were there, Camille Flammarion and all were there to continue the activities. And he realized about how great of responsibility there was before God and before humanity. So then it was it was no longer Léon Denis, right, speaking, was Spiritism speaking through him. That's what he said. In a lot of his talks, he mentioned that. And then, of course, he became a very, famous Spiritist speaker. He began to defend and clarify the philosophy or the ideals in conferences, congresses, and lectures, not only in France, but throughout the we call them, Belgium, Luxembourg, Netherlands, those countries around France. He did that. And then before he passed away, he wrote a couple of things that he realized his mission was all about. And those are the five main, components of his overall mission: to really further develop Spiritist studies, continue mediumistic research, promote Spiritist movement in France and beyond, deepen the moral aspect of Spiritism, and really consolidate Spiritism in the first decades of our last century, meaning the 20th century. So all that was what Léon Denis really, found himself as his activities, as his mission, to really deepen, right, what we know today, about Spiritism. So that's why I want to call him the apostle, not necessarily the 12 or the sent, right, the 12 disciples, but someone that got the message, learned, qualified himself, and went on to really get some work done, really roll up the sleeves, right, and got a lot of work done. That's what Léon Denis did for us. So if I'm able to really, bring some final remarks of his life, in this picture here, he's 79 years of age, almost blind. And then he says something very interesting, that it's not enough to know and to believe, it's necessary to leave our beliefs. That is, to insert into our daily lives those superior principles that we have adopted. And I like to call that there are two phases of Spiritism for anybody's life. There's one phase, the first phase, where we come to know Spiritism. Oh, that's nice. Oh, I'm going to go there, get some passes. Oh, I'm going to go there and watch a lecture. Oh, I'm going to go there, maybe see some friends. We get to learn about Spiritism. It's good. It's fun. I feel good when I go to the Spiritist Center. I drink the magnetic water. I feel good. It's great. That's one phase. It's one, phase, I should say. The second phase is when Spiritism enters ourselves, right? And that's the phase that Léon Denis is describing here, because it's no longer the Flavios of the world talking. It's no longer the person, but it's the idea, the Spiritism ideals that are speaking through me. Everything that I do, does this make sense? Is this aligned with Spiritism? Is this aligned with what I learned, what I preach, what I say, what I read, what I talk, what I think? And that phase is a much more complex one because it requires a lot more work. A lot more work. Léon Denis was ready for it. When he was 79 years of age, he made that statement, albeit a very, impactful one, because let's remember, right? When he was 79, this was the beginning of the 20th century, at the verge of World War I. A lot of selfish, people were, living by that time. A lot of ideals were, around, patriotism and I'm better than you, you're better than, not ideals of, hey, let's all come together. Let's all find out, together. Let's all treat ourselves with respect. Let's all treat ourselves as equals. That was not the message, but he knew a different message. He was preaching a different message. He was sharing a different message. But that message was not only shared through his lips or through his pen, was also shared through his actions. Which to me, that's much more impactful, much more beautiful than just saying a lot of beautiful words. But then, is that the same Flavio that was talking here with us last night? Look what he's doing right now, right? So the quality of the message gets dissipated if that happens. So what he did, so you know what? It's no longer Léon Denis who's living, right? It's Spiritism that's living through me. Was he perfect? No. Was everything he wrote perfect? No. There's some things that we can critique in his books, right? We're all allowed to critique and all that. But the fact that he lived an entire life dedicated to Spiritism, to really pass the message along, visiting locations, countries, and we complain sometimes, oh, I'm so tired, I drove 500 kilometers, I'm like 6 hours in a car. Imagine riding, 100 kilometers in the back of a horse, right? So never complained. He was always doing that, very thankful. He was always doing that with, faith, right? With, again, this is no longer Léon Denis living, but it's Spiritism that's living through me. And if we connect that with, I love this quote by James, even so faith, if it has no works, is dead, being by itself. So he didn't really keep his faith by himself or for himself. He shared that with everybody. He was never afraid, never embarrassed to say, I'm a Spiritist. This is what I believe. This is what I preach. This is what I understand what life is. So his performance, folks, in the heart of Spiritism was more diverse than those developed by Allan Kardec. While the codifier exercises his noble activities, for example, in the French capital, right? Léon Denis carried out his dignifying message not only to the countryside of France, to the people that needed the most oppressed ones, the poor ones and all that. He carried the message across, throughout the country and beyond. His unusual intellectual ability or capacity and his clarity in making comments and understanding, matters of the epoch, right? Really led the Spiritist movement in France and to the rest of the world that gravitated towards the city of Tours in France. So after Allan Kardec's passing, things really, propelled to a much bigger context where the city of Tours became the convergence point for everyone that wanted to understand Spiritism. Caravans of people. For example, Arthur Conan Doyle visited, Tours to get to meet Léon Denis. Right? Arthur Conan Doyle was the Sherlock Holmes author, right? Arthur Conan Doyle wrote a book called The History of Spiritualism, right? He interviewed Léon Denis, right? So there's a lot of things that really connected the city of Tours because of Léon Denis' works. And if we look, right, what he did from a product perspective, these were all the publications that we have access to today that were published, right? Christianity and Spiritism, Here, the Hereafter, Spirits and Mediums, Joan of Arc, In the Invisible, The Beyond and the Survival of the Being, Spiritism and the Catholic Clergy, Spiritism in the Art. As a matter of fact, this book talks about the beautiful connections that happens in any artistic movement, all the cure, all the healing that happens in artistic environments like theater and dancing and all that, right? The Celtic Genius and the Invisible World, the Great Enigma, the Invisible World and the War, the Reasons of Life, Life and Destiny, Progress, Experimental Tests of the Survival, and Socialism and Spiritism. A critique about the socialist, ideas of the time. So when you look at that, undeniably, right, he played a huge role within the progress or the process of revelation of Spiritism. That really gave this great apostle all the necessary support, obviously, to really catapult the Spiritist ideas to not only, France by the time, but throughout all the other places of the world. So with that, again, that's why I wanted to bring the topic, because when you look at Léon Denis, a lot of people say, oh, he was a philosopher, he was this, and he was much more than that. But we forget to realize all the works, all the activities that happened behind the scenes that this great Spiritist did so that we could be here today talking about Spiritism, and oftentimes we take that for granted. So with that, I want to thank you once again for your time. If there are any questions, any comments, I would love to take on those right now, folks. Thank you so much.